glad that you could join us. So are you going by your environmental Seattle, or are you going by your Soyattle? What are you going by right now?
Oh yeah, let's change that in your server. I am indeed Soyattle.
All right.
But you can call me Karl. That's great. Yeah, Joe Manchin. What in the world is he up to? He's definitely serving his own interests. I know that he has raised the issue of nuclear, which is my specialty.
Mm-hmm.
I don't consider him a good actor for clean energy in general. As you mentioned, his interest in fossil fuels is just over the top, not okay. It belies sort of this, just no concern for the future of our environment.
Oh yeah, for sure. I 100% agree with you that when I clip this segment for YouTube, I'm going to call this the Cokes Man in Virginia or West Virginia, and I'm going to make this whole fucking thing about it. It's going to be great. But not all of my audience knows who you are. So if you can give a little bit of background about yourself, keep it as short as you want. We got time. It's all good. But yeah, go ahead.
So, hey, I'm Karl, formerly known as Your Environment Seattle here on Twitch, now known as Soyattle. So why don't you come over and soy with me at Soyattle on Twitch TV. That's Seattle with some soy instead of the C. And I, of course, talk about nuclear energy. I do some IRL politics. Tomorrow, I'm going to be at the Global Climate March here in Seattle, Washington.
Oh, that's awesome, dude. I didn't see you on my fucking Twitch stream deck, so I'm gonna give you a shout out really quick. So you said that that Manchin has come out in support of nuclear energy. Are you thinking that he actually approves of this, since it's like not a fossil fuel, but something that is considered like something that can be mined or whatever? Or do you think this is just him being like, oh, I can give this and not have to worry about it because no one wants it anymore?
I think it is a bit of a needling to the Democratic Party, and I sort of compare this to this change that we see in the Democratic Party. For example, the DNC platform for 2020, for the first time in 30 years, included nuclear energy, and so I think that he's definitely playing the calculus that he believes this is an issue which will drive a wedge into the Democratic Party. And we've seen things like this before. When it came to civil rights, the Democratic Party absolutely became divided, but the majority of the party, the vast majority, made the right call. And I think, if you organize with the Democratic Party, you can make that you can make that allegory to that history. You can make the advocacy you need in order to do the right thing and change as a party. That's what really matters.
Oh no, I agree with that. I do like the analogy with the civil rights, that end of the spectrum. The because right now it does seem that a lot of more moderate Democrats are a little like iffy about the whole environmental movement, whether or not we actually need to invest as much as people are asking for into green energy. I think most people, at least Democrats, as far as that's concerned, agree that we could at least clean up the air a bit more, whether or not that means installing a ton of charging stations for electric vehicles or completely getting rid of coal, because we can get clean coal. It's a lie. Such a lie. But like, whether those are the things or not is where I think the rub is, and is also with everything else paying for it. Would you say that that's an accurate assessment of what's going on with what you've seen?
Yeah, and when it comes to clean coal, we can talk about carbon capture and sequestration. Now, what this has done is this purports to eliminate the emissions. Unfortunately, with today's technology and today's best practices, the best we can get is a 50% reduction in carbon emissions. Yeah, so it is not close enough. It is still a unproven technology, as opposed to things like renewables and nuclear. Renewables will save a lot of fuel. Nuclear actually eliminates fossil fuels in many places like France. And so, yeah, we have just this opportunity to move forward. And we might have an argument when it comes to exactly how we're going to fund it, but the cost of climate change and the cost of adaptation without changing our energy system will be much, much higher.
No, totally agree with that. I tell people, and if you're just turning in, hey, thanks everybody. But because I tell people, I'm probably the furthest left person you'll find as among liberals. Essentially, like I don't consider myself a leftist, but like the furthest left liberal you can find is like how I describe myself nowadays. And with that, the reason I bring that up is because when it comes to things that Karl here is saying, is like I 100% agree with him on this. Like we are on the same page when it comes to like nuclear energy and everything like that, but we we might disagree about like funding mechanisms or what have you. Now, speaking of nuclear energy specifically, because this is your wheelhouse, this is where you get your activism going, right?
Right.
What is it that about modern nuclear energy you think is like why we should go about it? Because I know that people are like, oh no, what's going on in Ukraine has got people worried. People are worried because of Fukushima. Everybody saw Chernobyl the last year or whatever, when everybody was stuck in their house during the pandemic. Are those safety concerns still present? Do they do anything to alleviate those? What's going on there?
So the core of the safety concern is true. And I need to start by saying that because we have a history of abusing technology as a species. We have a history of industrial failures as a society. And we have learned from these failures. We've seen, for example, Tacoma Narrows Bridge had a disastrous collapse. And we learn from this and we learn how to do things better. It has been 11 years now, 10 and a half years now since oh no, sorry, that was 3/11. It has been just over 11 years now, but since I remember the date, it has been just over 11 years now since the disaster at Fukushima Daiichi, where 3 reactors out of 10 failed. And think about that. We had 3 failures, 10 possible targets, maybe 7 or 8 of them were vulnerable. But those workers saved those plants, saved majority of the plant. And the contamination was less than a tenth of the contamination from Chernobyl. And Chernobyl was 1 reactor popping. This was 3. So
Wow.
as you can see, just from 1984 to 2011, even with a disaster that was possibly 3 times as bad, we had improved containment, improved public response, and improved remediation of the site, where 99%, or maybe like 95 to 98% of the Fukushima prefecture is reopened. People are allowed to move back into the closest town near the plant called Fukushima Daiichi. Daiichi meaning 1, and they have a sister plant, Daini, or 2, and that's where the balance of the reactors. So there's I think 5 of them at Daiichi, and 4 or 5. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's 10 total, and they're about 50-50 between the 2 sites. So yeah, this is it is a historical fact that we have had some pretty significant disasters in the nuclear industry. We've gone from literal atomic war, unrestrained use of atomic weapons in testing to make bigger and bigger devices, 530 airborne explosions of nuclear energy. And that, in fact, is the source of over 90% of the contamination that comes from nuclear technology. So Chernobyl, a fraction of that. Fukushima, barely noticeable. In fact, immediately after Fukushima Daiichi's accident, we saw a very large concern for things like cesium, which were already present and have never even gotten close to doubling in the Pacific.
Wow.
Throughout the deep ocean. And in fact, barely has even touched our shores. So there's because we know the difference between the Fukushima radiation and the atmospheric testing radiation because of the signature, the proportion of the different isotopes coming off of it. So we've seen this really bad contamination from the use of nuclear technology, but we've also seen improvements. And throughout all of this, the number of deaths attributable to nuclear energy for now and into the future will always be less than 10,000, and in the past, less than 4,000. The total number of injuries from now and far into the future will be less than 500,000, and that includes the worst of Chernobyl, the worst of Fukushima. Beyond this, we have other sources of radiation that are all around us, and even other nuclear accidents. For example, May 3rd, 2019, less than 2 miles from where I live, we had a radiocesium source from a research hospital that was accidentally sliced open and contaminated several workers. I face more direct risk from that incident than any nuclear energy accident that will ever occur. So I hope that I come around to, sort of understanding, yes, there is a risk, but it is very insignificant compared to all other risks that we face relating to the nuclear industry and nuclear technology in general. That's not even coming close to the generalized risk we face from industrial development and our need for energy. Energy saves lives, and every energy source has a cost. Now, whether or not you are ready to bear the cost of that, or you would like to have it completely borne by a community in the global south or in the deep inland China, where our solar panels are manufactured today,
Right.
That's a really hard decision. And so I'd encourage you to be a yes in my backyard person rather than a not in my backyard person.
Oh man, I couldn't say it better myself. Now, speaking of YIMBYs versus NIMBYs, we didn't touch upon the issue of nuclear waste. I know very little when it comes to modern nuclear power plants. I know that I think it's Generation 4 can supposedly do something with it to recycle the waste or something. I don't know any of these things. Can you give our audience a bit of information about that?
Sure. Well, what you have to start with is realize just how little nuclear waste there is. So starting, if you have a Coke can or something the size of a Coke can around you, I'll just say, yeah, there we go. Well, about half of that big gulp or my big water carafe here will be something like 8 to 12 ounces. Is that right? Yeah. So, but the volume is not so important as the mass, because that's where the energy comes from. And so the mass that it takes to power your entire lifetime of energy demand will create 4 kilograms of used nuclear fuel. That's 100 years of a high energy use American lifestyle. You will put 4 kilograms into the landfill about every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's that
It's
small.
insane.
It's 2 weeks versus 100 years. And what do we do with it? Well, consider first that a nuclear reaction is extremely difficult to achieve. It's like the air-fuel mixture in your car, and if you don't have that just right, you get no spark, you get no joy. With a nuclear reaction, you need the fuel, you need a neutron source, and you need a moderator. And in all of the modern nuclear reactors, that moderator is water. Maybe 1 or 2 still use graphite, but almost none of them do. And this, by the way, is the other reason that Zaporizhia was in Ukraine was not a concern. Zaporizhia had no graphite in their 6 reactors. They're only water reactors, and in fact, they have 1 more water loop than my closest plant because they're a pressurized reactor. So it's getting back to waste, of course, but describing how difficult it is to create a nuclear reaction. So understanding that once you take it out of the reactor, once there's no moderator left, that means that there's no way of creating a nuclear spark. And so at that point, you could leave it in a well-isolated concrete cask and nothing happens. You hit it with an earthquake, a tornado, you can hit it with a jet airliner, and it'll be safe. You'll probably want to re-inspect it if any of those things happened. And so we do. We re-inspect. These are called dry casks. They're I think they're about 20 feet wide and 40 to 60 feet tall. They're enormous casks, and they are built to withstand all of those threats and more. And they're definitely safe for 40 years, and we continue to re-inspect them thereafter. And so if there's any question about the safety of this material, uh, I, I would need to talk to you and understand what your concerns are, because it doesn't explode, and it's just fine sitting where it is in a dry cask storage for at least 40 years, if not 100.
Now, then, if that's the case, why have there been concerns about? I don't remember the name, but where we have it in Nevada, where a lot of the nuclear waste is being stored, the mountain. I just don't remember the name of it right now.
Right. So this is Yucca Mountain,
Hmm.
and essentially, what we had was a search for candidate sites, and out of those candidate sites, we arrived at which one would take the waste by the process of punishing our political enemies. Yes, that's right. Democrats do it just as well as Republicans, and they chose poor Harry Reid to take the nuclear waste for the entire nation. And so, my friend Jim Conca writes and speaks about this often. He hates the site. He took a look at it and saw, water inundation, and so they'd have to have extra barriers. They have, a fairly favorable access, but not the best rock. Water permeable, as I said, and so the containers were a definite issue, and so they had to keep addressing the containers and whether or not those would hold the waste. And then we have the wonderful requirement from Congress that we must pack nuclear waste in solid glass rather than something simpler like a mixture of concrete or grout, as he calls it. So this concrete mixture is just as effective as vitrification or turning it into glass when exposed to nominal levels of water.
Sure.
Now, of course, you could crush it up with a jackhammer, maybe a little bit easier than the glass, and then you'd have a problem. But this is not something that we design nuclear containment for. In fact, Jim Conca makes a great case for what I call the secret billion-year nuclear waste repository, and that is the Waste Isolation Pilot Project in New Mexico. It is the Permian Salt Basin, which over millions and millions of years, the salt from the ocean washed in and created a great thick layer of salt. And so it's very soft. It's very easy to get into. It is impermeable from new water inundation. It takes millions to billions of years for water to inundate that layer of salt. And that, unlike the layer of salt in Germany, where they tried to store their nuclear waste, it's called Assay 2, this is a much thicker structure and a much bigger salt structure. So this is really the perfect place for us to store nuclear waste. And Yucca Mountain was, in fact, unfortunately, a tool to punish the Democrats' political enemies at the time.
Oh, wow. Okay. That makes sense. Now, what I had asked earlier about like new generation power plants that are, I guess they're online now. I was misinformed the last time I talked about this, but they're able to somewhat recycle some of the waste in its own processes. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Right. So the goal there, of course, is to run a nuclear reactor on spent fuel.
Yeah.
There are some places that can already do that. In fact, CANDU reactors have that capability of consuming waste or running on natural uranium. We also have advanced reactors like a molten salt reactor. There is one molten salt reactor online in the world, and that's in China. It's about 100 megawatts, so it's just above experimental size and about in that demonstration size where you're really proving out the operational characteristics of that plant. And so I really wish that we were building one here in America, but at least we have one in the world somewhere. So that, yes, the Chinese molten salt reactor might be able to use spent fuel. and we might be able to use it in CANDU reactors. We also have the way of using spent fuel by reprocessing or separating the fuel from the fission products. And those fission products, they're both the most dangerous components in spent fuel, and they're the least valuable, except for some very specific chemicals. They're the least valuable part of that spent fuel. So we want to keep out the uranium-238, sometimes called depleted uranium. We want to keep out the uranium fuel, or U-235, and we want to take out the plutonium and some other heavier elements. And so this is what they actually do in Japan and some places in Europe. They separate the plutonium and valuable uranium from the fission products and the depleted uranium. I wish that we had more interest in this, reprocessing the fuel. But the fact is that it's so cheap to get uranium. It comes out in abundance in places like, I think it's Kazakhstan, and Australia and Canada both have incredibly rich uranium veins. So it's just not economical to do this unless it's mandated by the state. And in the US, we at once mandated that we cannot reprocess fuel, and then that mandate was reversed. And so the industry is just not interested in pursuing this technology until we know we have a reliable regulator and sufficient demand to really require that this fuel be reprocessed. But again, to get back to your point, fourth generation reactors, there are a few models out there. In fact, there's a few existing models of reactors that will work on either mixed oxide, that's that reprocessed fuel, or work on spent fuel themselves in some way. But yeah, that molten salt reactor and other burner or breeder technologies, those are the real future of dealing with nuclear waste. And if we move to breeder technology, where we use up all of the fission energy that's in that U-235 and U-238, then we have 4 billion years of fission energy available on Earth.
That's insane.
It comes out of, it comes out of the ocean. It comes out of the monazite sands that we need to make our cell phones. It comes out up everywhere. We have so much fissionable material just here on Earth, and that's not even touching the moon or the asteroids or the inner planets.
Man, you'd think that the fossil fuel industry would just be all over this. Is it because it's too abundant? Is that's the issue?
Let me tell you something about the fossil fuel industry. They are very interested in maximizing the value of their land. The fossil fuel industry leases land from the government to extract its value as fast as possible. And you're absolutely right. They would be all over this if it was less plentiful, if it was harder to get energy out of a piece of land, then the fossil fuel industry would definitely be ready to extract it. But it's just too good. Less than 25% of the O&M cost for a plant is fuel. Even if the price of uranium doubled, then you're looking at what, 30, 40% of the cost of running a nuclear plant? It is labor. Nuclear energy is a leftist miracle. I say that as a leftist because it favors labor. It turns human attention and brain power and perseverance into energy. That is magical.
Chef's kiss, man. That's really, no, that's so true, because, and it's not just like people think, oh, you need to be a nuclear scientist to like run a nuclear power plant. Yeah, to run it. But to work there, no. Like it's up and down the labor skill chain, right? Like, am I wrong about that?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
No, you're absolutely right. We have friends here on Twitch. Critically Thinking Veteran is trained to be part of operating a nuclear reactor. We take kids out of high school that can barely pass calculus, and we train them on how to run a nuclear reactor. This is like, it doesn't take a PhD to actually be an operator. It takes time, attention, and discipline, and maybe one or two smart people in the NRC,
sure,
at the Bill Gates company, who knows what they're doing to design, to double check, to really make sure that the the parameters of the reaction inside that core are correct. And that's really the biggest cost right now. Is we talk about the SMR from NewScale, a company in Oregon who's building in Idaho right now. That's at Idaho National Labs.
Okay.
They spent $500 million fighting through the regulations to license a new nuclear reactor design, the first new design in 20 years, and the first SMR, the first what I call 3+ generation nuclear reactor. And the 3+ is sort of to signify that this is a smaller structure, and so it has much less energy contained within it, and it's much more difficult to see that structure have some kind of a containment failure because it's so small. It's like a mouse jumping off a building, more likely to survive than that big old elephant.
Okay. That makes total sense. This has been so illuminating to me. So, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm going to try to summarize what you've been saying here. So essentially, what you're saying is that nuclear today, nuclear tomorrow, nuclear forever. No, I'm just sorry. That was a bad joke. No, but in all seriousness though, that essentially, if you're trying to look at the cost of climate change versus the cost of potential nuclear disaster, the nuclear disaster is it's infinitesimal small. It exists, but we've developed all these kind of safeguards, and especially within the United States, we have plentiful land, so we can keep it away from communities, things like that, build out infrastructure for it, what have you. But climate change and climate disaster is an assured thing. So if you're looking at a way to try to help reduce that, nuclear energy is probably the best way to go about that.
Right. And in fact, the best thing we can do is save our existing nuclear power reactors. They were designed a long time ago, and they've gone through inspections over the decades so that we know that they work. And so I wanna ask you to save Diablo Canyon. This is the final nuclear reactor on the Pacific coast, but it's not right next to the water like Fukushima Daiichi was. It's well above the floodplain of the worst tsunami that we think could be possible on the Pacific Rim. And even if we had one of those historic tsunamis that they're frankly far-fetched in that area of the world,
sure,
we have contingencies. After Fukushima Daiichi, every nuclear reactor was audited and stress tested to make sure that they can survive inundation. Even if we don't think they're in the floodplain, we have to understand how to deal with water in these situations. So again, here's my shirt for it. Save Diablo Canyon.
Great. Now I guess to kind of finish this out, do you have like an estimate about how many nuclear power plants the world might need to help with this, or maybe the time frame for it, just briefly?
Yeah, in fact, this is part of my policy prescription, and I would like anyone out there who's already speaking to your representative or senator, ask them, what would you be willing to do to tackle climate change? And if it's everything possible, then that's great. I would like us to have 25% of the world's primary energy come from nuclear by 2050. That's going to be thousands of reactors. So what I think we should do is we should try to build 2 to 3 or get 2 to 3 started every month outside of China.
Wow.
China has already committed to building one or starting one every month for the next 15 years. So by 2035, they will have 140 new nuclear reactors. And China is amazing at building these right now. They are going, 3-4 years to complete a reactor instead of the 7 to 10 that it takes in the West.
Now, I would assume, given China's technocratic bent, that they're not cutting corners here, especially since that would negatively impact their own people, and they seem to kind of care about that. But why? How are they able to build so quickly if they're not cutting corners?
Well, there is lesser regulation, of course. You don't have property owning NIMBYs in China throwing their weight around.
Okay.
You don't have delays in the supply chain. They're very good at managing that supply chain. They don't have, whether this is a good or a bad thing, there's no concrete strike in China right now that's preventing mass transit going up like there is in my neighborhood. Now, maybe that's because they don't pay their workers well enough, or maybe because they do. Maybe they have some kind of social safety net there where people are not so dependent on our capitalist system. For whatever the reason, China is able to move faster as a society on building this clean energy infrastructure. And if we just, the rest of the world, the other 5-6 billion people out here, we ought to be able to do something like that, no matter what our political system.
No, I think that's fair. But I'm sorry to say that this, Karl, I do have to continue on with the newscast. I greatly appreciate you coming on to talk about this. So if you want to shout yourself out real quick, go ahead.
Absolutely. You can find me here on Soyattle. That's here on Twitch. Soyattle. That's Seattle with soy, S-O-Y, instead of the S-E-A. And as you can see, you can soy out with me about things like nuclear energy and environmental activism. So catch me tomorrow when I do a live stream of our global climate march, March 25th, here in Seattle.
And everybody, please be sure to go ahead and check that out. I dropped his link in all the chats here. And again, Karl, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm sure that tomorrow's show is going to be great.